friends, ladies and gentlemen, at this time we are going to begin the funeral services for Ralph Austen. If you have a cell phone or a pager, I would ask for you to please take a moment to turn it off now or make sure that it's in the silent mode. And officiating today's services will be Rabbi Daniel Kurzane and Cantor David Berger.
Dear friends and family, we are gathered here this morning to celebrate the life and to mourn the death of Ralph Austen, Zichrono Livracha. My name is Daniel Kurzane. I'm relatively new here as the rabbi of KAM Isaiah Israel, and I'm here with Cantor David Berger. We're the clergy team here in this congregation where Ralph and Ernestine made their Jewish home for the past 2 decades. Those of us who have joined here this morning form a unique community. This group of people has never been here together before, and it will never gather in the same way again. Only Ralph, who is at the center of all of these beautiful connections, could have brought this group of people together. And so as we join together in memory and prayer, we ensure that his memory will continue to live on as a blessing. Yehud Amichai wrote a poem called A Man in His Life, translated by Hannah Bloch and Stephen Mitchell. A man doesn't have time in his life to have time for everything. He doesn't have seasons enough to have a season for every purpose. Ecclesiastes was wrong about that. A man needs to love and to hate at the same moment, to laugh and cry with the same eyes, with the same hands to throw stones and to gather them, to make love in war and war in love, and to hate and forgive and remember and forget, to arrange and confuse, to eat and digest what history takes years and years to do. A man doesn't have time. When he loses, he seeks. When he finds, he forgets. When he forgets, he loves. When he loves, he begins to forget. And his soul is seasoned. His soul is very professional. Only his body remains forever an amateur. It tries and it misses, gets muddled, doesn't learn a thing, drunk and blind in its pleasures and pains. He will die as figs die in autumn, shriveled and full and sweet, the leaves growing dry on the ground, the bare branches pointing to the place where there's time for everything.
Third Psalm. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi, lo echsar, in ot desheya על מי מנוחות, על מי מנוחות, ינעלני. נפשי ישובב, ישובב, ינחני ומגלה צדק, ינחני ומגלה צדק, למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי, שיבתך משענתך, הימה ינחמוני. תרוך לפני, לפני, שולחן נגד צוררי, דשנת ושמן ראשי, כוסי ערב היה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני, כל ימי חיי, כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. אדוני רואי, לא אחסר. אדוני רואי, לא אחסר.
We continue with the traditional translation you'll find in your service book. Please read with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I only spoke with Ralph once, except for a few brief conversations on the phone. The one conversation we had was long and far-ranging. We spoke of his life in Chicago and his travels abroad, the scholarship he conducted in varied yet interconnected fields, his connections with Jewish communities at the University of Chicago and here at KAM Isaiah Israel, and his persistent pursuit of knowledge. Ralph struck me as a man of boundless curiosity, who never demurred from stoking the curiosity of his neighbors and friends. He wanted to learn everything he could about the world and, more importantly, the people in it, not only to satiate his appetite for knowledge, but also in order to put that knowledge to work in making the world a little better than it was. The numerous comments and reflections that I've heard over the past several weeks from so many different people who knew and loved Ralph have demonstrated to me how much of an impact he had on this congregation over the past two decades. And we are a stronger and a wiser community for his efforts. I'm sorry not to have known him longer and not to have known him better. And so I'm now going to defer to the memories and the reflections of those who knew him best, a series of speakers to share from their relationships with Ralph. First, his son, Jake.
I want to thank Canterberger for the beautiful singing. I want to thank Rabbi Kazan for the kindness that you've shown our family. We really appreciate this. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jacob Austen, and I'm very fortunate that Ralph Austen was my father. I want to thank all of you who came today and who sent kind messages. So many notes were incredibly specific about what my father meant to them. Dad was brilliant, yet humble. He was hyper-focused, yet thoughtful to others. And while he was certainly judgmental, he only judged whether or not you were smart. He was kind to you no matter your intellect. But if he deemed you intelligent or interesting, there were no other factors he considered. We heard from a female scholar that in the 70s, my father gave her the respect and the opportunities that others did not. We heard from a trans scholar who says my father was the only one who didn't turn his back on them. And we heard from too many others to catalog in these brief remarks. Dad worked hard. He woke up, he exercised, he made lunches for my brother and I. He rode his bike to work in rain or sleet or snow, a practice he continued as a cycling professor emeritus as recently as last August. He rode home, he had family dinner, he washed the dishes while listening to a ball game or an opera, and then he retired to his study, to truly study. My mother worked just as hard, but grading papers and creating lesson plans related to my experiences. What my father did was something else. Surrounded by towers of 50 or more library books, some in German, French, or Swahili, he would read late into the night, processing the information from every book. Ralph Austen was a serious scholar, but what meant the most to me was that while he was always scholarly, he wasn't always serious. He knew hundreds of jokes. His sister recalled him going head-to-head with an elder joke master in Mexico, trading stories until they exhausted their reservoirs. Other than classical composers, the only musician whose oeuvre I am sure he knew comprehensively was fellow Harvard man Tom Lehrer, the erudite novelty songmaker. He was 15 when the first issue of Mad magazine was published, and 70 years later he could quote verbatim the dialogue from Super Duper Man. There's a story that I accurately predicted my brother would quite reasonably edit out of the obituary. Every Friday evening, our family gathered at my parents' home for Shabbat, my mom creating amazing meals, and my dad holding court at the head of the table, telling his sons, grandchildren, and daughters-in-law, and my mother fantastic tales of a youth filled with adventure and whimsy. In 2018, he recounted something so crazy I barely believed it. But Ralph Austen did not lie. In the 1950s, he took a job in Boston selling wind-up mechanical monkeys door to door, which turned out to be illegal. His boss felt bad that he got in trouble, so he hired Dad to tour schools in a children's show. Donning a raccoon coat and a monkey mask, young Ralph became Harry, the Oxford-educated gorilla, talking down to lowbrow American types in a haughty British accent. I realize that some of you will not find this particularly funny, but I find it profoundly hilarious, as I'm certain does my son Noble, who fortunately inherited my pa's absurdist genes. My father's hard work, loyalty, humanity, and intellect will forever make him my hero and role model, but more importantly, his humor, even on sad days like these, forever makes me laugh. I love you, Dad.
I'll invite forward next Ralph's sister, Judith.
Until I was an adult, my brother never called me by my given name. Feeling in charge and oftentimes put upon by my permanent presence in his life, Judith Rose Pinky Pesty Austen was a frequent alternative. And when he became aware of initials in a way of referring to someone, I became JDC, as in Judith Dearchild. Time to do your homework, and here are some arithmetic papers I designed for you. I just truly did that. When feeling warmly towards me, I was affectionately addressed as Child Neo. As in, hey, Child Neo, you did a great job playing Cinderella and polishing my wicked stepbrother's shoes. Thanks. When people would comment and tell my mother what a wonderful older brother he was, she would tell them, when Judy Line was born, I told Ralph, Ralph, you are my child, and Judy is yours. You must take good care of her. What a responsibility to lay upon a 7-year-old boy, especially one whose first response to my appearance was, a girl? A girl? I'd rather have a pony than a dame. Somehow he adjusted, and being playful and creative, gave me pony rides to rival my horseback riding lessons, picked me up and threw me around the house like Burt Lancaster in the movie Trapeze, and told me wonderful stories. Now, there were some compromising moments, such as when I was 5 years old and passionately into Indian beading, but couldn't make a beaded ring for myself. Ralph knew how to thread those thin wires into those tiny beads. I'd broken the first one he made for me. Okay, I'll make you another ring. Only you have to do this. Okay, what? I asked. You have to believe that I was the first Jew to come to America with Christopher Columbus. You were? Absolutely. Mommy says you were born in Germany and came here on a boat with her and Daddy. Guess you don't really want this ring. Okay. I said, I say you came up with Christopher Columbus. No, he answered. You have to believe it. Oh, all right, I said, annoyed with this upping the ante. And he took on a warning tone. I learned to bead from the Indians. You did? Of course. How else would I know how to do this? I got my ring. When I was in junior high school, and socially young for my age, I had been bemused and hurt by some friends by a party I was not invited to. My parents decided that some time with my brother was in order, and sent me up to Cambridge to see him. As always, he had a good plan for showing his sister the necessary sights. The most personal moment was a visit to the Harvard Fogg Museum of Art. There, in an entrance lobby, hung a huge horizontal painting, a multi-time sequence narrative depicting a biblical scene. A woman was carrying a man's severed head in a basket. Her queen, or lady, marched ahead of her, both of them on a rustic path on top of a hill. Below them was an encampment of tents showing a sleeping and debauched-looking army. My brother put his arm around my shoulder and pointed to the picture and said, "There, child Neo, is your namesake." I stared into this elaborate epic painting. See the woman in the upper left? Her name is Judith. The woman behind her, carrying the basket in her handmaiden, is her handmaiden. The man just killed is Holofernes, general of the Assyrian army, having saved her people, the Jews, and the city of Bethulia from being conquered. Judith is bringing the severed head to her people. No one had to tell me. First, biblical Judith got to sleep with the general, who looked pretty handsome and fit even in his sorry and partial state. And second, that she got to be a heroine in the bargain. I fell in love with my given name. Excuse me. I still love my name, I just have to find it. And declared with a new policy in my adult life, whether I had a sword or no sword, a handmaiden or was just on my own, I would be Judith Austen the First. Thank you, Ralph, for giving me my name.
We invite forward next Khalil, who's like a son to Ralph.
Good morning, everyone. I can't remember exactly when I started calling him Paul. I'm not sure how the name stuck for me, although hearing Jake just a moment ago use it, I now realize all these years later. But there was something very special about him and Mom Ernestine that made me feel part of the family. I have no memory before this feeling. I just know that I instantly felt like the third and youngest child behind Jake and Ben. And although my mom and dad have lovingly and beautifully co-parented me my whole life after they divorced when I was 3, the Austens were my nuclear family. I ate meals with them constantly, breakfast and dinner. Paul mixed cereals to make new concoctions. Who does that? I had never seen anyone mix cornflakes and granola. Paul once said the corniest thing over dinner. I can remember it clearly. Out of nowhere, it was so silly for a serious guy. Pass the peas, please. And he said it so quickly. And he said it again until finally it struck. Pass the peas, please. But that's who he was. He never missed a moment for levity and joy. I went to White Sox games and the movies with them regularly. Paul loved popcorn so much. It was like watching someone discover something that is the most delicious thing you've ever eaten for the first time over and over again. Like the Cookie Monster, he ate popcorn and it flew everywhere. Paul did push-ups every day. And at whatever point Ben told me this, I thought, that's what I'm going to do. He was an avid tennis player, rode his bike daily, took care of his physical body. And I love that about him. When we are young, we cannot know who we will become. Sure, there are signs and hints from our personality, but the truth is There are many paths on life's journey. Some paths we choose, others we stumble into, and still others we are guided or led to follow by the people who love us. Paul did this for me, showed me by way of example, helped me become the person I am today. I knew he was a big shot professor at the University of Chicago. I watched him leave the dinner table nightly, as Jake has mentioned, to go to his study and work. But this particular path he laid for me was more intentional in a way. Just as Ben and I were about to start our senior year of high school, the Chicago Teachers Union, as you could predict, went on strike. The strike lasted for weeks, so long that Paul grew impatient and threatened to send Ben to lab school. That was like abandoning the White Sox for the Cubs. It would be a betrayal. He gave Ben and me an ultimatum. Either we go to Ravenstein Library for a few hours every day, or else. He assigned us a book report to read William Golding's The Crucial Decade, an interwar study between World War II and the Korean War. Not sure what the point of the book was, but it was work. For maybe 2 weeks, Ben and I dutifully sat in the stacks at Ravenstein, cutting up between sessions of reading. Note, the cutting up came first, the reading second. The strike ended, we turned in our reports. My best friend and brother stayed at Kenwood. Several years later, after graduating college and starting a career as a public accountant, I decided I might want to be a historian. The first person I called for advice was Paul. No one in my family was or had ever been an academic except Paul. The blessing of being a historian is knowing how to find and measure meaning, not just in the way he gave voice to African peoples whose stories had forever been ignored, but also in the everyday choices we make and how we spend our time on earth, and the paths we choose for ourselves and helped to guide for others. Paul gave me this gift. He made my life more meaningful and taught me how to do the same for others.
Thank you. Ralph's grandchildren are going to come forward now. Lucia, Maya, Noble, and Jonah. And Lucia and Maya will share some reflections.
Hi, everybody. Second grandchild, going first. For me, Grandma and Grandpa have always been kind of a set unit. Grandma and Grandpa are taking you to the zoo this weekend. Grandma and Grandpa sent a birthday card in the mail. In my mind, they were a pair before they were individuals. A singular unit of measure, one Grandma and Grandpa. And no phrase emphasized this more than, we're going to Shabbat dinner at Grandma and Grandpa's house this Friday. That being said, if you were there at 6926 Constance for a Friday night dinner, it might have felt a lot more like Grandma's house. She was the one hosting, really, holding down the fort from her spot in the kitchen while she prepared lasagna or salad. Grandpa might be in the kitchen, too, watching a White Sox game with his own unique intensity. Or maybe he'd be in the living room, reading the newspaper on his favorite reclining chair. He always seemed to me to be lost in his own world of sports statistics and current events, until Grandma in the middle of the story would ask him, "What year did we go to Cameroon?" And without missing a beat, he would answer, 1973. Grandpa knew the answer to any question she could throw at him, and he shared that knowledge so seamlessly that it felt like part of the story itself, a single unit of question and answer. They also functioned as a pair in the kitchen. After Grandma cooked and we all ate, it was Grandpa's job to wash all the dishes, and after that, to walk the dog. At this point, a kid really only had 3 options: helping Grandma sort out dessert in the kitchen, disappearing into a phone or computer somewhere upstairs, or going out with Grandpa to walk the dog. I chose those dog walks less frequently than the boys did. But I have a few particular memories where I ventured out to help Grandpa pick up the dog's extra credit, as he would always say. One specific moment stands out. It was the spring of my sophomore year of high school. I might not even have been 16. And Grandpa asked me what I was doing in school. This wasn't necessarily a rare occurrence, but while out on these walks, as he often did at home, Grandpa could disappear into his own world, or, more commonly, the broadcast of the White Sox game on his phone. That day, though, I told him I was reading a book, Fortunes, by Peter Ho Davies, about, among other things, the life of Anna May Wong, the first Asian-American Hollywood star. Grandpa, of course, like he knew everything, knew who she was, and had seen a few of her movies and those starring some of her contemporaries. The exact details of the following conversation may be lost to me now, but I remember that Grandpa spoke to me on my level, both as a student, just being exposed to the book's topics for the first time, and as an equal. In some way, it felt like I'd impressed him with what I knew and understood about the book, and I was finally worthy of a real conversation. It wasn't only that I felt incredibly smart, which I definitely did, but that he knew so much and was still so eagerly engaged with things that I could understand. This was more than 3 years ago now, and I still want to be able to impress him with everything I'm learning at school. I want him to be there when I graduate college, so he can understand that I want to be the one who always has the answer, just like he was. Grandpa loved more than just learning. He loved sharing what he knew with me, with Grandma, with his students, and with the whole world. I hope that everyone here today had the opportunity to learn something from him, just like I did. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Maya, also known as Sarcastia, the Princess of Sarcasm, the name my grandpa bestowed upon me many, many years ago. As Ralph's eldest grandchild, I can speak for myself, Lucia, Noble, and Jonah in saying that we couldn't feel luckier to have grown up with him as our grandfather. It is challenging to properly express just how much my grandpa has shaped who I am and what I value. And the outpour of love and celebration of his life over these past few days has only emphasized how proud I feel to have had him in my life. Although I grew up only a block from my grandparents, their house was where I felt most at home. Some of my earliest childhood memories are Shabbat dinners followed by sleepovers at 6926 South Constance. No matter what, I could always count on the sound of the keys turning and the dog barking, indicating that Grandpa was home and we could finally have dinner. I had comfort in knowing that without fail, I would wake up on Saturday morning to the sound of NPR blaring from every single radio in the house, accompanied by the smell of hollow French toast waiting in the kitchen. I attest this dependability to my grandpa's strong belief in upholding tradition, much of his life consisting of unwavering routines. Despite his ritualistic nature, Grandpa always sought out to expand his horizons. He was seemingly all-knowing, yet incredibly humble at the same time. He refused to sacrifice his humor or creativity to further his intellectualism. He was so clever, he sometimes seemed to exist in his own world, especially when he would translate a joke to us in English, then crack up when repeating it to himself in its original language. I am so glad Lucia already familiarized everyone with Grandpa's extra credit policy, because Ralph Austen took extra credit very seriously. And that went beyond just dog cleanup. His learning of multiple languages is just one example of how he sought out extra credit within every aspect of his life. His continued scholarship at UChicago well after his retirement certainly earned him extra credit, as did his completion of a second bar mitzvah at 83. His dedication to biking well into his 80s earned him extra credit, although not from his wife, who definitely was begging him to stop for years. Beyond this contention point, he always went above and beyond when it came to my grandmother, Ernestine. They were a perfect match, balancing each other out in the best ways. Witnessing my grandparents' adoration for one another made them the blueprint for how I viewed devoted relationships. He arguably earned the most extra credit of all as a grandpa. When I was little, he would take me on Hyde Park adventures in a stroller attached to the back of his bike. He always made sure to get to know my friends and learn about their interests, their college, their major. He supported my dancing, even as I grew older and my rehearsals began to conflict with Friday night dinners. No matter how late, I would arrive home to a plate set aside in the microwave by my grandma, and my grandpa ready to sit with me at the kitchen table as I ate hours after everyone else. I wish that I had inherited my grandpa's photogenic memory, mainly so I could hold on to all of the wisdom he shared with me in the dining room or on dog walks. Truthfully, I can't yet process there being a world without him there to tell us fascinating stories and teach us Yiddish phrases. Thankfully, I know I will feel his presence every time my eyes catch one of his African masks that he collected over his lifetime of travel, or when I see my dad or my brother command a room with their captivating storytelling. My grandpa was a profoundly thoughtful, driven, persistent, and strong man whose devotion to his craft and his loved ones was unquestionable. His commitment to tradition was passed down onto me, and his passion for academia inspires me to always strive for excellence. Grandpa, I love you, I miss you, and I promise I will never stop trying to earn extra credit.
We invite forward now one of Ralph's colleagues, Emily Osborne.
Greetings. I am a faculty member in the Department of History here at the University of Chicago and a fellow historian of Africa. I first met Ralph Austen through his publications when I was in graduate school. I knew him as a towering figure in the field of African history long before I met the tall man in person. I really came to know Ralph one summer in the early 2000s before I came to U Chicago. He and I both attended a Monday Studies Association conference in Guinea-Conakry, West Africa. The Monday Studies Association is made up of academics from various disciplines and from all over, West Africa, Europe, the Americas, and elsewhere. We share in common an interest in the Monday world. Monday is a large sociolinguistic group that predominates in the interior of West Africa. It is rich in culture and history, and it is a world Ralph became very interested in later in his career. The conference we attended took place in two parts in two different cities. The organizers set aside one day in the middle of the conference for the drive between the cities. Unfortunately, that drive took much longer than planned. Near its end, more than a day delayed, we rode in a minivan. I looked to my left to see one of our fellow conference participants, an elegant, elderly French academic. She pulled a very small bottle of scotch from her purse and started to swig it. Then I looked across from me, and there was Ralph, sitting next to a Ghanaian teenager who worked as an assistant to the driver. And Ralph was carrying on a conversation with that young man about the Epic of Sunjata. That epic is foundational to Monday. It narrates the rise to power of Sunjata Keita, who is credited with founding the Mali Empire in the 13th century. As Ralph would be delighted to tell you, the epic now assumes many forms and mediums. It is oral, written, sung, recited, recorded, performed, and the subject of films. Ralph could also explain how the epic functions as an expression of historical consciousness. That is, it offers a snapshot of how people interpret, represent, and transmit the past. And so there was Ralph posing questions to this young Ghanaian. When did you first hear the Epic of Sunjata? Who taught you about Sunjata? While most of us were hot, tired, and hungry, and one was drinking scotch, Ralph saw something else in the moment, an opportunity to learn. It strikes me that this scene encapsulates an ethos that guided Ralph Austen in scholarship and in life. His intrepid curiosity, his interest in crossing boundaries of place, time, and nation, and his attention to centering African peoples and African perspectives within a dynamic global world. This ethos is evident in Ralph's scholarly record. A short trip through some of his publications reveals its work. We start in East Africa with Ralph's first book on German and British colonial rule in Tanzania, Ralph demonstrates that the colonizers did not operate upon a blank state, but were shaped by African peoples' perspectives and prerogatives. We then consider the continent broadly to learn economic history. Ralph illuminates Africa's internal modes of growth and then shows how they interacted over time with economic forces that came from across deserts and oceans. Now we go with Ralph to West Central Africa, to the Douala peoples of Cameroon. As Ralph reveals, over the course of 300 years, this coastal ethnic group went from being fisher folk to power brokers. They did so by striking a delicate balance between European and African commercial interests. From Cameroon, we pass through Mande, where we have already been, to the Sahara and its borderlands. Ralph demonstrates that the vast desert is not an impenetrable barrier, as many assume. Among other things, it helped inspire and diffuse poetry, music, and religious beliefs. This brief tour, and I do have some maps, is but a slim representation of Ralph's scholarly output. And while my admiration for Ralph as scholar is deep, my affection for him as a colleague is equally profound. So I would like to end my remarks by coming back with Ralph to the University of Chicago and to the African Studies workshop. That workshop is made up of graduate students and faculty from various disciplines who come together to share drafts of their research. Ralph is a pillar of our workshop, and he has been for 40 years. It is where he has engaged faculty colleagues, and it has also served as the apparatus through which he has mentored and trained generations of graduate students. For me, as with so many others, it is hard to imagine ASW without Ralph. And so here we are. It is Tuesday, 5:30 in Foster Hall. People are starting to filter into the first floor classroom where we meet, and there is Ralph. He is wearing his bright yellow windbreaker. He carries his white bicycle helmet because he did bicycle there. He greets us all warmly as he walks in, and we return his salutations. He takes a seat at the table, settles in, and helps himself to the snacks and drinks that are passed around. He pulls out a hard copy of the pre-circulated paper. It is printed out, double-sided, a little dog-eared, and lightly marked up with his scratches, comments and questions for the presenter. He looks up. Ralph is ready for discussion. Thank you.
Next, Ralph's daughter-in-law, Jacqueline.
Good morning. I met Ralph when I was 16 years old, when Jake and I started dating as Kenwood Stewarts. My father, Bennett Stewart, passed away when I was 20 years old, and in so many ways, Ralph picked up on being my dad for the adult chapters of my life. For nearly 40 years, Ralph has given me the advice and encouragement and support that a daughter needs in navigating the personal and professional stages of life, what we now call adulting. Our wedding was in the Austen living room. Ralph was the first grandparent on the scene when Maya was born, freshly biking to campus. The greatest piece of advice anyone ever gave me was when Ralph advised, when I was looking for a graduate program, that I go to the University of Chicago. They had just hired 3 faculty members who worked in areas I was interested in. 2 African Americanists, Ken Warren and Elizabeth Alexander. Ralph insisted I meet with them. Ken would later serve on my dissertation committee, and Elizabeth Alexander, whose father, Clifford Alexander, had been one of Ralph's classmates at Harvard, is still one of my dearest mentors. In addition, there was a newly hired silent film scholar Ralph said was extraordinary, named Miriam Hansen. Ralph facilitated a meeting between me and Miriam when I was home for Thanksgiving in 1991. And from that first meeting, through directing my dissertation and until her passing, Miriam was my champion and role model. I can never thank Ralph enough for seeing how right this would be for my scholarship and for my life. So Ralph's advice kept me and Jake close to home. Ralph was a smart guy. eventually living right down the street on Constance. Who goes to graduate school in the neighborhood where they grew up and then gets hired by that same university? Jake and I were blessed to raise our children in such close proximity to all of their grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, on all sides of their families, including Danielle's amazing family. Memories and bonds that will always fortify them and us. As you've heard, Ralph modeled in his everyday life just how precious and joyful and essential family time is. And for me, how seamless family life and academic life can be. At the countless Shabbat dinners and high holy holidays and Hanukkah gatherings and decades of birthday celebrations and Mother's and Father's Days and brisses and barbecues. Ralph was always telling jokes and stories, of course, but he was also cultivating discussion and debate in a way that was totally organic. This was shocking to me the first few times I sat at the Austen table. In my family, which I think is typical for African American families, you don't debate with your elders or your guests necessarily. But the vigorous back and forth on politics and sports and culture, including movies, literally prepared me for graduate seminars. And the demonstration that you could disagree with someone, even passionately, but maintain respect and love. These are lessons I've taken into every discussion, and it's clearly a lesson our society still desperately needs. Ralph's intense love for and engagement with his immediate family was matched by his unwavering dedication to his extended family. When I was pregnant with Maya 21 years ago, Jake and I joined Ralph for a journey to Takao, and it was now the Czech Republic, where his tight-knit group of relatives returned to receive a formal apology for the town for its complicity with the Nazi regime. It was a powerful experience to be with Ralph and his cousins, not all connected by blood, but connected by the bonds their parents had forged and cultivated in the next generations. Ralph and his progeny have hosted and been hosted by this family wherever in the world their travels and careers and their family lives have taken them. This is an obligation that Ralph never failed to meet. To be there with Maya in utero was a testament to the power of loyalty and love, and a testament to survival. Maya, Lucia, Noble, Jonah, you have inherited all of these gifts from your grandfather. Jake and Ben, thank you for sharing your father with me for all these years. Ernestine, Mom, I hope you can take comfort in these two brilliant and caring men by your side that you and Ralph gave to the world and to these grandchildren, who through your boundless love and guidance will continue to keep Ralph's legacy and his values and his humor alive. I love you. Later today, Ralph will be laid to rest in the same cemetery as my father and other beloved relatives. From my mother and Nikki and our entire family, please know that we are always connected in life and in spirit.
Our final family reflections before Cantor Berger's eulogy will be offered by Ralph's son Ben, accompanied by Danielle.
I think he's gonna cry, guys.
I'm glad Jackie did. I didn't want to be the only one. Hey, everybody. All right. When my brother and I were back from college one year, we were in my parents' basement and we came across an old high school yearbook. It was from 1961. We started to flip through the pages and we found a picture of our mom. She was a first-year teacher, super young, but they had her name wrong. So So we went upstairs to show our dad, and we found him reading the New York Times. And I'm going to pause here. Some of you already know this about my dad, and we've talked about this a little bit. He had a superpower. It was a level of concentration like an impenetrable force field. He could block out the outside world like Superman in the Fortress of Solitude. Danielle says I've inherited a bit of this. But for my dad, one of the things that activated his superpower was the New York Times. When he read the New York Times, which he did every day, the entire thing, the force field went up. So here my brother and I were in front of him, holding the yearbook open to Mom's picture, and we're like, Dad, Dad, you know, we're trying to break through the force field. Dad, Dad! And finally, he acknowledges us. And so we tell him about the yearbook, the wrong last name, and without looking up from the newspaper, he says, that was her name when she was married to her first husband. And then he goes back to reading the paper. Now, Jake and I were kind of stunned. We're in our 20s, right? And we never heard about his previous marriage. But it wasn't just that this was news to us. It's also that it was sort of impossible not to think of our parents, of Ralph and Ernestine, as being together. That was true then, and it's been true ever since. In fact, it's impossible to tell you about my dad, about the substance of his life, without also talking about them. He was 29 when they met. She was only a couple of years younger. Of course, they had lived lives before they went on their first date. A 5-hour opera. What was he thinking? But for the next 58 years, he and my mom were together. They played tennis and Scrabble. They shared most meals. As you heard, my mom always cooked, my dad cleaned. They watched ball games. They read the same books at the same time so they could discuss them. They traveled and hung out with their great friends and with all of us, the family. My mom laughed at my dad's same old jokes every single time. And then her laugh would make him laugh even harder at his own jokes. They could argue and get on each other's nerves. I'm not trying to idealize anything. But it wasn't just that they were married 56 years. They remained in love. These past 12 months, as my dad struggled with leukemia, were incredibly hard on both of them. She was his primary caretaker for much of that time, such a heavy load. But as close as my parents were for more than a half century, this past year, they became even closer. Amid everything, it was a beautiful thing to behold, something intensely intimate. And I guess that's what I want to leave you all with. For us and for others of us, they've been a powerful example of what it looks like to try to spend much of a life together, to make a life together. Thank you.
Thank you to all of those who shared so beautifully. And there are so many more stories to tell, and the family is eager to hear your stories as we convene this evening and tomorrow for Shiva, a reading from the book of Ecclesiastes. Lakol zman ve'et lachol chefetz tachat hashamayim. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Cantor David Gilbert.
To do proper honor to Ralph Austen is a daunting task. We've already heard, and truthfully, anybody who knew him already knew the kind of person that Ralph was. That he was a man of tremendous intellect, climbed the highest towers of academia, sure, but also that he was a person who showed the world over and over again how much he cared, both for those of us lucky enough to be in his life, and for those, Tzalmei Elohim, the images of God and people around his community and around the world. So some of you have heard me say this before. I return to a fundamental belief that I have, that every Torah portion comes at exactly the right time. I look to this week's Torah reading that we'll study and chant on Saturday. And the Parsha begins with an iconic phrase. Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha v'klala. See, I place before you this day blessing and curse. From even just this first word, the Torah emphasizes the importance of sight, or maybe better, even insight, of deep perception of the world and our role in it. How else could you choose blessing and curse if you couldn't see first? It's a commandment to see through falsehoods and half-truths that the world offers us, made especially explicit via a section later in the portion that delves into false prophets who, through lies and deceptions, drag people away into idolatry and worse. The 12th and 13th century Tosafists, whose writings stand at the center of my own academic research, which on a personal level Ralph always supported, appreciated, asked me about all the time, showed a real interest in, helped me with. Those Tosafists tell us that in this first verse of the portion, God is telling the Israelites that since God is the one who chose goodness for this world, God, which maybe we can read here in honor of Ralph, and perhaps, as much as we talked to the family, Ralph was here at shul a lot, but it wasn't exactly out of theological faith. So let's reread God as real truth here. That real truth is fundamentally different from all those other deceptions that fill the world. Now, Ralph, as we've heard, had an incredible ability to perceive truth, to unearth truth, and to act on his knowledge of truth. He saw through deceptions that blinded others and had a uniquely kind, gentle, and utterly convincing way of helping others to see those deeper truths that he somehow inherently understood. I think that's actually part of why he, for several years, organized these Saturday lectures here at the synagogue. And to understand how strange of a program this was for a synagogue, fine, people hear people talking on Shabbat, that's pretty normal. But the range of academics coming to talk about who knows what on Shabbat, that's different. It seems like Ralph knew every single person at the University of Chicago and found just the right moment to approach them and say, "Do you want to give a talk at KMSA Israel on Saturday?" Not only because he wanted to learn, but also he wanted us as a community to see the truth, to be more informed, to be smarter, to be better, to be able to tackle the challenges of the world, not through deception, but through truth. It is this Torah commanded insight that drove his academic work, which we've already heard, but it's just as much that deep insight that drove his lifelong engagement with another piece of this week's Torah portion, our obligation to take care of the needy amongst us. The Torah describes first a fictional and idealized economic system, the result of which will be, there will be no hungry amongst you. Then, coming back to reality, just a few verses later, the Torah says, when there are needy people amongst you, and then commands us to get personally invested in helping those in need. Whether that manifested in his participation in political campaigns determined to fix the systemic ills of our society, or in his deep engagement with newcomers to our country through his real devotion to the Hyde Park Refugee Project, Ralph was there to see this commandment through. I would say that Ralph is one of the few people that I've known in my life who you could be so constantly surprised by stories about him. Maybe it's because I came to know when I came here he was already 77, but to hear this person who's there every Shabbat at Torah study with erudite wisdom to share, it's a good time to, why not hop on a boat and work it and go to Egypt, and who knows, maybe Israel, or whatever, find a way to do all these crazy jobs. He's a person, there's constantly, the more you learn, it's few people in the world that can actually surprise you, I find. And Ralph is one of those who constantly surprised me. We've already heard about Ralph's deep love for Ernestine, and how they are and were always a group. They came as a couple to everything. I could see them in Torah study thinking together. Ernestine, I want you to know that we are here for you. This community has loved you and Ralph for a long time, and we are here, and everybody in this room is here, not only out of love for Ralph, but also because we love you too, and we're here. It's sometimes not an accident when people die, and I always like to say there's a special honor for people who get the privilege of dying on Shabbat. But Ralph did one better. Ralph died right when it became Shabbat, following the Jewish day that we celebrate love, Tu B'Av. To imagine that he couldn't bear to go without having gone through one last day that is a celebration of love is true to who he was. When I went to visit him shortly after I learned about the hospice decision, and I come in and he's in the bed and he starts telling me what he sees, because he's Ralph and he sees. And immediately what he's telling me is that he sees the sort of political interactions between the different hospice workers, and he's telling me about how the dynamics are playing out. And I thought, it's not something I've ever heard someone say when they come to visit in hospice.
And then he also told me not to come and visit too much because, it really would interrupt his reading of the New York Times. We give honor to the spirit of a man whose presence was much larger than his very tall frame. We give honor to a person who gave much to our community and to many communities all around the world. We had a long string of Austen celebrations at this synagogue that went on for years of just, wow, Austen on the calendar again. Including Ralph's own second bar mitzvah. And this is our first time, as the boys were reflecting with me, that the Austens have marked something on the other side of what it is to have an Austen event here. So just as we have shown the Austens how to celebrate and how to love and how to be part of a community in joy, we're here with you now in this moment of sorrow and beyond. The Austens are always a presence here. You always have a home. I see the four of you together right now. It's a lot for me. I see him in all of you. So we're going to offer memorial prayers and bring this part of the service to a close, but that doesn't mean that we're done sharing stories and sharing funny things and smart things and cute things and amazing things. That work goes on. May Ralph's memory that we all share be a blessing for all of us and for all the world around us. I invite you to rise for the words of Il Mali Rachamim. شخين بامرامين همتساي من خانخونا تحت كنفي عاشقينا بمعلوت كدا وشيمته يواريم كزار راكيا مزهيرين ات نشمات رفال بن شولاميت שלח לעולמו בגן העדן תהי מנוחתו ענן בו השתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר
God of abundant mercy, God Most High, may the soul of our loved one, Ralph Austen, who has gone into eternity, find the gift of perfect peace in the wings of your presence. together with the holy and pure whose light shines like the radiance of heaven. Compassionate God, hold him close to you forever. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal. May he find a home in you, and may he rest in peace. And let us say,
Amen. You may be seated.
Friends, this concludes the services here in the synagogue. The interment and burial service will continue at Oakwood Cemetery in Hyde Park. For those of you joining us in the funeral procession to the cemetery, please do keep the following safety precautions in mind. Please make sure that your bright headlights and your four-way hazard flashers are on at all times. Please be sure to obtain an orange funeral safety sticker for your windshield, and we will be providing several of the cars in the procession with a magnetic orange flag to be placed on top of your car. Please travel as close as safety permits to the car in front of you to avoid any gaps in our procession. And for your own safety and security, I would suggest not speaking or texting while driving to the cemetery in the funeral procession. The family will be together for Shiva at the Austen residence at 5000 South East End Avenue, Unit 22C. They'll be together today from 5 until 8 p.m. and continuing at Ben and Danielle Austen's residence at 1342 East Madison Park, and that will be Thursday, tomorrow, from 6 until 8 p.m. The family has also requested that any memorial contributions in his memory to either here KAM Isaiah Israel or to the Hyde Park Refugee Program. All of that information regarding Shiva and donations can be found in the service folder that you should have received when you came in. If you did not receive one, we do have a few extras, I think, as you leave. And for those of you joining us online, that information is also available on our webpage at chicagojewishfunerals.com. The following individuals have been asked to serve as pallbearers: Jason Shoulder, Jonah Austen, Noble Austen, and Khalil Muhammad. At this time, I would ask everyone to please rise and stand in place as we escort the casket, the clergy, and the family from the sanctuary. Also, there was a red cased iPhone that was left by one of the register books, so I'll have that out in the lobby if you're missing your phone. Thank you.
you're going to follow right there.
Thank you. For those of you going to the cemetery, the funeral procession, if you're parked in the parking lot, please wait where you are. If you're going to the procession and not in the parking lot, just go alongside going northbound on. You can't get through. Go like just the next block over, and you'll find all of us, and we'll all go together to the cemetery. Thank you. You may return to your